and I was in the back of her bus, and she's writing music, and we're singing, and she's saying, no, sing it this way, and I'll try it that way. She said, no, let's try another way. She was.
At 74, Crystal Gayle is finally breaking her silence. For decades, she kept quiet about the untold story behind her rise to fame and her rocky relationship with her sister, Loretta Lynn. They were country music royalty to fans, but behind the glitter and gold were years of silent feuds and deep emotional wounds. Now, Crystal is ready to speak her truth. From heartbreak to healing, she's revealing the pain, the resentment, and the one phone call that changed everything. This is the story country music fans never saw coming. The story of Crystal Gayle and Loretta Lynn. Born Brenda Gayle Webb, Crystal Gayle was the youngest of 8 children who grew up in a poor household in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. Gayle had already developed musical interests from a young age, which were further shaped during her teenage years. She began singing in church, performing folk songs, and making demo tapes. By the time Crystal was finally getting her feet wet in the music industry, Loretta was already creating a name for herself in the world of country music. This inevitably meant that one way or the other, Crystal would grow up in the shadow of her sister. These two couldn't have been any farther apart, but at the crux of it all, they were sisters with a great bond. Loretta Lynn always encouraged Crystal to sing. Thanks to that encouragement, Crystal Gayle began touring during the summers in high school, and by the time she was 16 years old, she performed on the Grand Ole Opry in place of her sister, who had gotten ill. Loretta was a good sister, and she also represented success and survival. Crystal, on the other hand, had a different experience. Her sister's success meant that she would have to carry the expectations of others on her shoulders. That wasn't all she had to carry. There were also whispers that Crystal was riding her sister's coattails. This was far from the truth for Crystal, as she felt she had been earning her success through her merit. Loretta continued encouraging Crystal's talent and even helped her land her first recording contract. However, at the back of her mind, she knew she would have to map out her identity. While Loretta was known for her raw and rough country sound, Crystal was finding her place with a smooth voice and her signature long hair, all of which pushed her into a country pop sound. Crystal Gayle's signature sound was often described as country-politan. Her music blended traditional country elements with a smoother, pop-oriented style. This made her a successful crossover artist, and her soft and clear vocal delivery made her stand out in her sister's shadow. Soon enough, she was described as sophisticated, and her warm vocal delivery was distinct from that of her sister, Loretta Lynn. The tension between the country sisters. Crystal's shift from traditional country style wasn't well received at first. Some people in the industry held up arms and criticized her for abandoning her roots. Even her sister did too. Loretta Lynn reportedly didn't like this shift. In fact, she questioned it. And perhaps this was just the beginning of the many tensions they would later endure. Publicly, the famous country sisters never spoke of their differences, but people with an inside look noted the distance. According to these insiders, the distance between the sisters grew in the late 70s and the early 80s. This was at a time when their careers were skyrocketing upwards and onwards, and Crystal's hit, "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," made her a crossover star. On the other hand, Loretta remained focused in her lane and continued climbing up the traditional country music charts. Fans were obsessed with the sisterly country duo, but behind closed doors, their relationship wasn't great. Despite it all, Loretta held on to her bold nature. In a way, she was an outspoken matriarch. On the flip side, Crystal remained quiet and obedient as she felt pressure to stay in her lane. Their relationship was veering off the rails, and there were reports of missed holidays, ignored phone calls, and even family drama with other family members caught in between. Crystal Gayle had grown up looking at her sister and constantly idolizing her, but suddenly, an active game of resentment was going on. Crystal began to resent the constant comparisons to her sister. In an interview, she stated how much she loved her sister, and she also said that sometimes loving someone doesn't mean you always understand each other. Through it all, the country sisters never spoke out, but it isn't hard to realize that the sisterhood was burned with the pain of fame and the blessing of love and family. Throughout the 1980s, Crystal Gayle cemented her place in country music as she built an identity different from that of Loretta Lynn's. However, with this distinct separation came a list of sacrifices. While Crystal Gayle was journeying to perfect her pop country style, crossover hits, and even her sophisticated stage presence, many traditionalists accused her of moving too far from her roots. These accusations were in no way light for Crystal Gayle. There were brutal cuts that didn't only come from fans and members of the public, but also from her own family. whispers began to move fast in Nashville. These were hurtful rumors that Loretta disapproved of Crystal's image. Rumor had it that Loretta disliked Crystal's silky gowns, floor-length hair that became her signature look, and jeweled eyeshadow. Loretta and Crystal were from two different worlds. Loretta was the voice of coal country, while Crystal was tagged as the one who had gone to Hollywood. Not many people knew this then, but few knew how much Crystal craved Loretta's approval, even when they were so far apart in their musical styles. When no one was watching, Crystal would rewatch Loretta's television appearances and award show performances, searching for clues of pride in her sister's eyes. Crystal confessed that she had always wanted her sister to be proud of her. Crystal admitted, "I always wanted her to be proud of me, but sometimes it felt like I had to prove we weren't betraying where we came from." This had become such a weight on Crystal's shoulders, and it also impacted their relationship. Their relationship turned into an unideal one, filled with unfortunate scenarios. They would share a stage, but never a dressing room. They would attend family events, but leave separately and at different times. They had a mutual love and respect for each other, yet they never seemed to lay down their guard around one another. There was a deep silence, tension seeping through their relationship, but the sisters continued to keep up with public appearances. During these appearances, they would participate in interviews, rave about each other's success, and even maintain cordial demeanors while standing side by side in hearty smiles. While the cameras rolled, they had a normal sisterly relationship going on. However, friends noted that their relationship was far from normal when they were backstage. These friends noticed a loud silence between the sisters. It caught them off guard, and they were pretty surprised. In 1918-3, during an award show where Crystal was nominated for a significant honor, Loretta was nowhere to be found. People began to talk. Some said Loretta was absent because of scheduling conflicts, while people who knew them closely implied that the reason was much more complicated than anyone could realize. One insider reportedly stated that Loretta felt like the family name was slipping into oblivion and becoming too polished. The insider stated, "Crystal was the future, but Loretta was afraid it meant losing the past." This didn't deter Crystal. She kept holding on, earning Grammy nominations along the way, and even creating a path few female artists could follow. Even with all of her accomplishments, she still felt the shadow of Loretta Lynn right behind her. She didn't see Loretta as her rival, but as a constant reminder of her biggest challenges. With every praise came a lingering doubt, and with every standing ovation came a daunting question in her mind. Would Loretta have done it this way? These were the silent thoughts she had to deal with, and they followed her for decades. Crystal Gayle battled these thoughts as she went on stage. All she could do was plaster on a smile as she navigated these uncharted waters. To the public, the Webb sisters were two talented country singers who had both achieved success. However, Crystal and Loretta's relationship was much more fragile than anyone knew. They loved each other dearly, but struggled to show it in the ways that mattered to one another. It wasn't just the music that had come between them. It was also pride and unspoken truths. Crystal Gayle had a lot of pressure surrounding her stardom. Not only was she Loretta Lynn's baby sister, but she was also a musician with a lot to prove. She was constantly bombarded with the feeling of being compared to a pedestal that belonged to her legendary sister. Loretta wasn't just her sister. She was a magnificent talent who carried herself with star power. For Crystal, following in her sister's footsteps felt unnatural, almost like walking on the edge of a hill with someone else's shoes on. Crystal Gayle gained success on her own accord. She broke records with hits like "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," and soon enough, she had become a fan favorite on mainstream television. Her image was carefully chosen to reflect a certain elegance which could attract a broader audience. She was a refined and commercial poster girl who drew in her audience. However, her curated image also worked to her disadvantage. Her pristine image had many tongues wagging, especially from those who preferred the way Loretta captured her words into song with raw honesty, grit, and heartache. They labeled Crystal as an artist trying to break away from the family's coal dust identity, when in reality, she was just trying to break into pop. There was a notable difference between the two sisters and their style in the music they created. On one hand, Loretta sang about being a coal miner's daughter. On the other hand, Crystal looked like she came from a luxurious mansion. While people ran with this narrative about Crystal Gayle, she lived a far different truth. Crystal never forgot about her roots or where she came from. She grew up in a little house in Paintsville, Kentucky, just like her sister. She lived the same life as her sister, walked on dirt-filled streets, and shared the same childhood burdens. However, by the time she made her way into the country music scene, a fundamental change was already happening as country music was evolving. Crystal Gayle wasn't trying to erase her past. She was merely trying to survive and move along with the industry's growth. Crystal once stated that she loved where she came from, but had to make her way. She couldn't be Loretta. Only Loretta could be Loretta. The public was starting to catch up on the subtle rift between the sisters, and they were fascinated by what seemed to be a rivalry between them. However, the sisters kept it classy at every turn. They never disregarded each other in public. They never exchanged unpleasantness in front of the press, and they seemed to present a united front as far as the public eye was concerned. Still, there was a certain distance between them, one that had no place in the lives of sisters. Emotionally, a void was created by unreturned calls, holidays spent apart, and occasional reunions that felt more compulsory than genuine. This unfortunate reality and circumstance was a thorn in Crystal Gayle's heart. Years later, she opened up saying, "I always wondered if she really saw me, or just the girl who wanted to be something else." This thought process on the part of Crystal was one she had to struggle to come to terms with as the years went on. The reconciliation between the sisters. As time passed, the tension and subtle difference between the two sisters softened as they moved. Loretta Lynn was slowly reaching her final years, and something changed. Crystal began visiting more, she began calling more, and soon enough, they seemed to be getting close again. At the start, they were separated by barriers created by fame and comparison, but slowly, they began to break down. Unfortunately, Loretta fell ill. Crystal was there for her sister when that happened. There were no cameras, press, or clickbait headlines. It was just Crystal and her genuine love for her sister. Crystal would sit by Loretta's bedside, holding her hand and whispering words they both longed to say for a while. Crystal wasn't just sitting by her sister's side. She was sitting and holding the hand of a woman who contributed significantly to the history of country music. When Loretta Lynn's health declined in her final years, Crystal Gayle was no longer the sparkly baby sister trying to find her place in the spotlight. She was now a longtime performer with strands of silver locks amid her once dark hair. She was also a mother and a grandmother who had faced the seasons of her life. As she sat by her sister's bedside in Tennessee, where Loretta lived, Crystal had become her sister's keeper. She cared for Loretta, comforted her, and sat silently on the edge of the bed, hoping she would have more time before the end could come to a close. The final moments of Loretta's life weren't filled with loud or grand reconciliation. It wasn't a dramatic moment filled with surprising and grand speeches. Instead, it was a quiet reconciliation between the two sisters. In a decisive moment, the two sisters could set their pride and misunderstandings aside as they welcomed in peace. In this decisive moment, nothing else mattered, not their differences or even the years they spent apart. In that moment, their sisterly bond was more alive than ever. Crystal finally quieted the silent voices in her head. Now she knew without a doubt that Loretta loved her, and she had nothing more to prove. All she had to do was be there with her beloved sister. Family members said Crystal would softly hum hymns beside Loretta's bedside. Sometimes, she would even sing the same songs they used to sing and harmonize back when they were just two little girls in Kentucky. These melodies were the simplest but more monumental in those final moments they shared than any hit song. The final days weren't easy. They were slow and tender, filled with quiet reconciliation, long-lost memories, and unspoken pain. Loretta's health had worsened to the point where she could no longer speak, and yet her presence remained deeply felt in every room she was in. During those fragile moments, Crystal Gayle sat by her sister's side, not as a performer or public figure, but simply as a little sister trying to find her way back to the one person who had once been her whole world. She would read the Bible to Loretta in a soft, steady voice, sing old hymns, and tell her stories from their Kentucky childhood. Stories about barefoot summers, hand-me-down dresses, and the laughter that once echoed through their small home. It was Crystal's way of gently patching the fabric of their relationship, thread by thread, memory by memory. There were no cameras, no crowds, no need for public declarations, just two sisters, rediscovering their bond in the stillness of a hospital room. It wasn't grand acts that brought them healing, but the small things, the gentle adjusting of a blanket, the warmth of holding hands, the quiet way Crystal brushed her sister's hair and tended to her needs with grace. Later, Crystal would reflect on those moments, saying, "We were sisters, and no matter what had come between us, success, distance, pride, or time, that bond was never broken, just bruised. And I think we both knew that. Ultimately, it wasn't about who said what or who was right. It was about love. Always was. Those final days weren't about music charts or fame. They were about forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need words, just presence. The legacy of Loretta Lynn and Crystal Gayle's revelations. Loretta Lynn passed away in 2012, a considerable loss that everyone mourned in the world of country music. Loretta Lynn was a country music icon, so the world felt her demise. However, Crystal Gayle thought it on a different scale. She mourned differently and privately than the rest of the world did. Crystal didn't just lose her sister. She lost her very last connection to the world, which made her who she was. She mourned the last person who knew who she was to her core, before fame was involved. She lost the woman who knew her before she became Crystal Gayle. And more importantly, she lost the woman who taught her many things. She taught her how to sing, encouraged her to sing, and even taught her how to dream big. The days following Loretta Lynn's funeral were daunting, to say the least. Crystal didn't say much publicly, but the weight of the significant loss rested heavily upon her. Through it all, her silence was all she had, and her silence had a lot to say. She was grieving her sister, but she also found herself grateful for the good times they shared, the lessons they learned along the way, and how they could find their way back into their sisterly bond, even through all the rocky roads that tried to keep them apart. At the end of Loretta Lynn's life, they had found closure in the way that mattered, not as rival country singers, but as two sisters and girls from Butcher Hollow. In the final days, they could share a little yet impactful moment in which they remembered being sisters again. Weeks after Loretta Lynn passed away, Crystal Gayle began opening up publicly about her sister in ways no one thought she ever would. It was a matter of reflection for the country star, and in those moments of reflection to her loyal fans, it was clear that what she revealed wasn't just about the grief. It was also about the burdens, the secrets, and truths she had held close to her chest for decades. In an interview, Crystal revealed something that piqued the curiosity of viewers. She stated, "There were things Loretta carried with her to the grave, but there were also things she made me promise I would carry forward." After this revelation, Crystal gave insights into what it was like being the younger sister of a legend. She revealed that while the world was in awe of Loretta and her story, as the unshakable coal miner's daughter, the Loretta she knew also had a side to her that was delicate, insecure at times, and even lonely sometimes. Crystal revealed that Loretta gave so much of herself to everyone else, but sometimes she didn't leave much for herself. To the public, Loretta seemed like her life was perfect, almost as though family and fans always surrounded her. However, Crystal said there were times when her sister felt alone and isolated, even with all the fame. That wasn't all that Crystal Gayle released. She opened up more about Loretta Lynn. She dropped another mind-blowing fact when she said, there were songs Loretta never released, not because they weren't good, but because they were too personal. Through this revelation, she clarified that Loretta wrote about things that would have surprised people. Crystal Gayle opened up with teary eyes as she spoke about what Loretta wrote about. It was family betrayals, regrets about her relationship with her sister, fears about her demise, and so on. She left these songs in the pages of her notebooks. Some were marked as lyrics, and others were marked as letters. Either way, Crystal had known about them for years, and in the last days of Loretta's life, Loretta gave her an old leather binder, a sacred binder meant for no one else. Crystal revealed, "She told me, do what you think is right with it. I trust you." This revelation shocked millions of fans to their very core as they wondered what Crystal would do next with Loretta Lynn's most prized possession. Crystal Gayle hasn't revealed what she intends to do with it yet. It remains uncertain whether she would publish the words of her late sister or even turn them into music. The silver lining in all of it remains that Loretta trusted her enough to hand over her most sacred treasure, and this was a great pleasure Crystal Gayle would forever cherish. That wasn't all Crystal had to say. She also spoke about the most painful parts of her life. She talked about how the music industry at specific points in her and Loretta's musical careers would put the two sisters against each other. She stated that labels, promoters, and fans would make particular comparisons. They would ask who was prettier, had more hits, and had a better voice. Crystal described this as a poison, and she stated that for a long time, she and her sister both drank it. Fortunately for the famous country singers, they could put all of the comparisons behind them in the final years they shared. This was a much better way to share their sisterly bond, void of comparisons and competition. It was all love. As Crystal Gayle opened up about all the challenging moments, the world finally understood the point of it all. They began to realize that Crystal's story wasn't just about the sister living in the shadow of another sister. It was about a sister who aimed to honor her legacy by speaking life into it while stepping out to find it. Crystal never once wanted to shine brighter than her sister. She only wanted to honor her sister's legacy, which she did through her revelations. All the things Crystal spoke publicly about weren't for the clicks. They had a lot of heart and soul. It was her way of closing the final chapter of their story, which had been through the ringer and back. Crystal Gayle's decision to open up about Loretta Lynn gave a much-needed insight into their lives as stars. They were more than just famous stars. They were also well-rounded people who had lived quite the life, filled with ups and downs. And Crystal's revelation proved just that. After Loretta Lynn passed away, Crystal Gayle went on a spiritual roller coaster. In one radio interview, she spoke about a dream that left her in tears. "I was standing in a field behind our childhood home," she recounted softly. "And Loretta was there. She wasn't old or tired. She was young again. She smiled and said, 'Tell them the truth, baby sister. All of it.'" According to Crystal, that dream was the push she needed, and because of it, she knew she would have to stop holding it all in. So she stopped, and soon enough, she began opening up about the complex love she shared with her sister and the joys and pains of their sisterhood. Crystal opened up more about her struggles of walking in Loretta's shadows. She felt as though Loretta was the blinding light, and she, on the other hand, was only learning how to be a reflection of that light. Crystal Gayle also clarified that her sister never tried to overshadow her intentionally. Crystal stated that Loretta had told her, "I brag about you to everyone, but I forget to tell you to your face." Crystal needed to hear this at the time, and through it all, she realized that they both had bright lights that the world needed. Crystal's vulnerability warmed the hearts of her fans and those of Loretta's. For years, people have described the two country singers as sisters who lived glamorous and successful lives. However, with Crystal's revelation, it was clear that the whole story wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. There was also pain and reconciliation. Crystal also opened up about Loretta's struggles. She wasn't just a star living a glam life. With her success came physical exertion, and Loretta often sang with pain and even toured with pneumonia. Loretta would perform on stages even while she was exhausted and physically drained. Crystal revealed that Loretta had once confided in her about fame. Loretta didn't know who she was when she wasn't on the stage. To her, that was the biggest challenge that came with fame. She said, "It can become your identity, mask, and prison." Loretta Lynn's final days were spent talking with her sister, Crystal Gayle. They talked about their legacy, and Loretta Lynn spoke to Crystal Gayle like any sister would. According to Crystal Gayle, Loretta said, "Let them know I loved deeply and tried, that I wasn't perfect, but I meant well." Through all their hardships and reconciliation, Crystal Gayle continues to honor Loretta Lynn's wishes. She speaks about her sister in a way that humanizes her. She speaks life into her sister's time alive, not portraying her as a saint, but as a beautiful yet flawed human being who created music for the world to hear. Crystal Gayle continues to honor her sister Loretta Lynn's legacy. She continues to open up about her late sister while focusing on the world Loretta Lynn left behind. As a personal reminder to herself, Crystal also began to realize that her sister's legacy wasn't only about her life on stage, but also about what she made possible for others off stage. Loretta Lynn was a force to be reckoned with, and Crystal Gayle was grateful for who her sister was and all that she did for her and others around her. At 74, Crystal Gayle continues to tour around the world. She has several shows coming up, including one in Belfast, for the Your Roots Are Showing event in January of 2026. Crystal Gayle also recently performed at the Stagecoach Festival and is scheduled to appear at the Ponte Vedra Concert Hall in November of 2025. Above all, she keeps her sister's legacy alive as she carries her name around wherever she goes as a light for all the world to see. As Crystal Gayle continues to share her life story with her sister Loretta Lynn, we are reminded that behind every legend is a story of pain, love, and unbreakable bonds. Crystal Gayle's courage to finally open up about Loretta Lynn honors Loretta's legacy and also paves the way for Crystal Gayle to share her story. As far as it all goes, Crystal Gayle is more than just Loretta Lynn's baby sister. She is also a legend in her own right, and this story is one of two remarkable sisters who conquered the world of country music. What do you think about Crystal Gayle finally opening up? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more.